When I left you, I talked about Dan Gibson, and specifically about the mosques. And as I said before the break, Dan Gibson is the first one, in fact, the only one to have gone to all the mosques. That's what any historian should do. That's what any archaeologist should do. They should go to the place that they're investigating. Am I correct? Yet he's the only one that's done this. No Muslim has done what he's done. And that's why it's important that we look and see what he has researched and his conclusion. He spent 25 years going from mosque to mosque to mosque because he saw that there were these geographical problems. He saw the difficulty with Mecca. So he wanted to find out where these earliest mosques were pointing to. Where are they pointing to Mecca? Since Mecca was not referred to until 741, since there's no place in the Quran that really fits Mecca, he wanted to see, well, then what were these people praying to? Now, what did he do? Well, to understand what he did, he looked at the Qiblas, but to find out the Qibla walls, not too hard to find out. Now, many of these mosques have been destroyed and rebuilt, but all of them do have floor plans, and they're still there. And many of the mosques that he looked at, about 65 of them, are still, their original structure is still there. They're still intact. So the Qibla wall, the longest wall, is the wall that would be facing the direction of the sanctuary. And what he did, he then used advanced thermal emission and reflection radiometers, which is aster satellites, the most exact way to find the exact coordinates as to the direction they were going. Muslims have labeled him and said that all he used was Google Earth. Listen, you and I use Google Earth, but he does not use Google Earth. The problem with Google Earth, it doesn't take into consideration the curvature of the Earth. But aster does, and that's why it's so specific, and that's why it had to be used to find these coordinates. He also looked at the tools. Now, to understand the tools he used, you can go up onto his website. I won't unpack it today. For those of you who are looking at the YouTube and certainly looking at the film, you can actually stop this and look and see exactly what is on it. Because he has described all the tools he used on his site. And if you go up to YouTube, if you go up to internet, go to http://thesacredcity.ca. CA is for Canada. Take a look at the tools he used, and you will see he answers every one of the critics there. One of the criticisms that has come up over and over again is that many of these mosques, because of the fact they're not directed in one direction, they're directed all over the place, that they were following the solstice lines. So in all of his latest pictures, he has put the solstice lines in every one of them to show you that none of them follow the solstice lines. This is absolutely fraudulent, and the Muslims who are trying to say this have not done their own work. They don't follow the solstice lines at all. When he came to the earliest mosques, he noticed that there were problems, and here's a case in point. Let's take a look at this mosque here. This is called the Qiblatain Mosque, which is in Medina. The green line is the current Qibla, and the green line points straight south, which is pointing towards Mecca. But it's been known as the Qiblatain Mosque, which means the Mosque of Two Qiblas, built in 626. No one understood why it was called the Mosque of Two Qiblas until 1987, when they were doing some refurbishing and they started digging down to shear up the walls. As they came down, they came across this wall right here, which was the earlier Qibla wall. And that Qibla wall is facing almost the entirely opposite direction, where the red arrow goes. That then explained what the two Qiblas were. That's the earlier Qibla. The green line is the newer Qibla. But where was it pointing? Why was it pointing almost in the entirely opposite direction? Well, when you look at it on a map, you will see why. Take a look and see where it's pointing. Now, when it was first discovered, most people thought it was pointing to Jerusalem. But that's not where it was pointing. As Dan Gibson found by looking at other mosques, like this one here, the Great Mosque of Guangzhou, that's Canton, in China. Not too far from Hong Kong, where all the problems are happening right now. That's thousands of miles away. That mosque still exists. It still has its Qibla wall. He went there, he did his coordinates there, and guess what he found? That mosque is facing Petra. Follow the red line. It should be facing Mecca, the black line. But you're talking about thousands of miles away, it's facing directly towards Petra. He went to India, to the Charaman Juma Masjid in India, South and South India, and that was built in 629. Look at the dates, 629. Muhammad was still living. Muhammad didn't die till 632. So this is still how Muhammad was living. Here you have the Cherman Juma Mosque facing Petra. Now each one of these blue dials are the coordinates for Jerusalem, Mecca, Petra, and the actual mosque to show you, so you have no question as to which is the closest Qibla. That's why in every case I'm going to show you now, you'll see these 4 dials. These are not my material. All of this is Dan Gibson's. None of this I did. Okay? Please don't give me credit for any of this. Give Dan the credit that he deserves. Here's the Jami Hama al-Kabir Mosque in Syria. Now we're in 637, so this is 5 years after Muhammad's death. He's been dead for 5 years, and take a look at where the Qibla is. Look at the red line, and you will see it's going straight towards Petra. Not towards Jerusalem, not towards Mecca. Here's the Fustat Mosque. This is the mosque that Creswell and Fehérvárdi had noted back in 1905. They thought it was pointing towards Jerusalem. It's not pointing towards Jerusalem. It's actually pointing towards Petra. They were off by 3 degrees. Then we come to the Dome of the Rock, probably one of the greatest structures of that day. This was built by Abdul Malik in 691. Take a look at it. If you've been to Jerusalem, you can't miss it. It stands out. Beautiful building. The greatest edifice when it was built. But take a look at where it is facing. It should be facing Mecca. It's not facing Mecca. It is facing Petra. In fact, take a look at the entire citadel from which it is built on. The entire citadel is facing Petra. They cannot destroy and rebuild it again. They've got to keep it. It's been there since 691. They can't do that, proving that if we're not going to cry out, the rocks will cry out for us. Here's the Humayma Mosque in Jordan. Now we're at the end of the 7th century. We're at the end of the century that Muhammad lived, 699. Where is it facing? It's facing Petra. Now we go to another mosque in Jordan called the Amman Mosque. We're going to look at that one there. That one is 701. So we moved into the 8th century. Remember, the mosques were supposed to be canonized in 624. We're now in 701. Almost 80 years later. And it's still facing Petra. Down to Yemen, which is the other direction, we get the Grand Mosque in Sana'a in Yemen, 705. It's facing Petra. Coming back up to Israel, the Kirbat al-Minya Mosque in Israel, 706. It's facing Petra. The red line. Take a look at all these Qiblas. Let's bring them in. Coming as far away as from Sherman in India, Guangzhou in China. As we get closer, notice where all the Qiblas are coming to. Directly towards Petra. Can you see how specific they are? Can you see how accurate they are? From all directions, not just one direction. They're coming from north, south, east, and west. And there you can see on the map, those are the ones we've looked at. Medina, Guangzhou, Cherman, Jami Hama, Fustat, Dome of the Rock, Humayma, Amman, Grand Sana, and Kirbat al-Minya. And look at the countries. Medina would be Arabia, China, India, Syria, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Yemen, and Israel again. All of them uniformly facing Petra. How accurate are they? Take a look. They're all within 45 miles, yet they've come from thousands of miles away. By accident? They didn't know what they were doing? They certainly did know what they were doing. So that's the first Qibla he's come across. It's known as Qibla number 1, because they are all uniformly facing Petra. None of them are facing Mecca. Not one mosque is facing Mecca up till 706. Then in 706, another Qibla is introduced. And this is known as the in-between Qibla. This is the one of the Wasit Mosque. This is the other one that Fehérvárdi and Creswell found. But take a look where it's facing. It's facing almost exactly between Petra and Mecca. Yet there's nothing there. There's no city there, there's no hamlet there, there's no building, there's not even a big rock there. It's just sand. So why is it facing that in-between direction? Hold on to that. We'll explain that. Now we go to 708, and here's the Masjid-i-Tariq Mosque in Iran. Now we're into Iran, another new country. It's back to facing Petra. So it's not that all the mosques suddenly face a different direction. No. Some mosques are still facing Petra. What's going on? Hold on. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, back at the Jerusalem, remember I showed you the citadel where the Dome of the Rock? Well, on the southeast corner, you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is built right here. There's the Dome of the Rock. It is also facing the exact same direction the Dome of the Rock. It's facing Petra, though it's built in 709. The Dome of the Rock was built in 690 to 691. Jami al-Umawi al-Kabir in Damascus, Syria, that's facing in between again. Here's that in between, the second Qibla. The Kirbat al-Masjar Mosque in Jericho in Israel, 714. Now we're well into the 8th century. It's facing Petra. Have you noticed we haven't found any mosque that's facing Mecca yet? The mosques were supposed to be all facing Mecca after 624. We're now into 714, and yet we haven't found one mosque that's facing Mecca. They're either facing Petra or somewhere in between. The Anjar Mosque in Lebanon, 714 again. That's in Lebanon. It's facing Petra. Then we go to Syria, and we have the Mosque of Umar, Basra in Syria. That's in 721. It's facing in between. In Syria again, you get the Hayr al-Kharbi, Syria, 726. We're now 100 years after the canonization of the Qibla, which was in 624. We're over 100 years later, and still we haven't found a mosque that's facing Mecca until this one. This is the first mosque that is facing Mecca. And look where it is. It's in Pakistan. Banbor in Pakistan, of all places. So here is a third Qibla. The first Qibla is uniformly towards Petra up until 706. The between Qiblas were somewhere in between, which start in 706, but they end in 744. You'll see why. What is going on between 706 and 744? Hold on, we'll get to that. Now let's go back to Syria, because now we go to Syria, the Qasr al-Hayr al-Sharqi Mosque, 728, it's facing in between. And now we get to the Amman Citadel Mosque, Jordan. Remember, I've already showed you this one. Hold on a minute. This one is facing Mecca, but take a look at it closer. You will see the older mosque that I showed you in 701, it's facing Petra, right? When we get to this one up here in 730, it's facing Mecca. That's the newer mosque. There's the older mosque. Both are still standing. So something happened between 701 and 730 to change the direction. Ooh, I love that. When you get to North Africa, now we have Qibla number 4. Here is a fourth Qibla. Are you following me? What's the first Qibla? Petra. What's the second Qibla? In between. What's the third one? Mecca, finally. And the fourth one? Parallel lines. Can you remember those four? So now we're getting to a fourth Qibla, which is fascinating because these are all in North Africa and in Spain, and all of them are going parallel to the line between Petra and Mecca. They're all going roughly parallel. So something's happening here. Why are they doing that? There's nothing down there. There's a reason, and you'll see why. We get to the Baalbek Mosque in Lebanon, 740, and that's in between. And then the Mushta Mosque in Amman, Jordan, 743. We're halfway through the 8th century. It's back to Petra again. The Haran Mosque in Kufa in Iraq, 744, in between. And that's the last one that faces in between. So something happens in 744 that stops all the in-between mosques. Qibla. You'll see why. I know I'm desecrating this language. Excuse me for who are the Arab speakers, but I'm going to call it the Qasra Uqaydir Kufa, Iraq, 764. It's towards Mecca, finally. The Ribat Fortress in Tunisia, remember what I said about all the North African ones? They are parallel. They are not towards Mecca. They are not towards Petra. They are parallel to that line. The Sahih Ramda Mosque in Bohar in Oman, 771. It's back towards Petra again. The Sumail Umani Mosque in Oman, 771 again. It's towards Petra. So there's still mosques facing Petra as late as the late 8th century. We get to the Raqqa Mosque. I didn't get this one right. 772. That is in between. So it wasn't just 744. And the Bibi Samarkand, Uzbekistan, 773. Most people thought it was Jerusalem. It's not Jerusalem. It's Petra. The Cordoba Mosque, there again in northern Africa, it's 784. It's parallel. And the Jami Uqba Ibn Nafi Kirwan Mosque in Tunisia, it's parallel because it's in northern Africa. So what's going on? Look at this graph here. All the Qiblas are facing towards Petra until 706. There was a confusion for the next 100 years. 17 face Petra, 8 are in between, 10 face Mecca, and 6 are parallel. The Qibla was not finalized towards Mecca until 876. That's the late 9th century, almost 250 years too late. So there's the Petran mosques. From 624 up until 772, they stop in 772. You have the in-between mosques from 706 till, here we say 772, actually it's 744, but there are still one or two that come after that. Then you have the Meccan mosques, which are start in 727, and they continue right up until today. In 876, every mosque then goes towards Mecca. And then you have the parallel mosques, which are not facing anywhere in Africa. They're actually paralleling the line between those. So, which Qibla is the most accurate? And what Muslims have answered, they say, well, the reason why this is so is because those who were doing the Qiblas before the Meccan Qiblas just didn't know their direction. They didn't know how to look right, left, east, or north. And that's why they are the most inaccurate. That is not the case. When they looked at all of the coordinates, they found that the Petra mosques, 17 of them, are 2.9 degrees with inaccuracy. The in-between are less than a degree off, 0.98. The Meccan mosques are the worst. They are the most inaccurate, 4.78 degree accuracy, and the parallel mosques are 3.5. So that whole theory has been thrown out. They actually got worse as they went on. So why were the early Arabs so accurate? What was going on here? Dan Gibson has found the answer. The reason they were so accurate is because they did not use mathematical equations like the later Arabs did in the 8th and 9th century. They used astronomy. They used the stars. They had to, because they were desert herders. They were nomadic. They went across thousands of miles, hundreds of miles at a time, with no roads. If they didn't know their direction, they would die. Otherwise, how would they find the next oasis? So what did they use? So they used what he calls the kamal, or as well known as this, a block of wood on a string, which measured how far up or down the knots on the string were by putting your finger on the horizon. And the more you went before it hit the northern star, before you reached the northern star, that's how many knots you were to go in that direction. For east and west, they actually used poetry. This is fascinating. They had about 32 stars that they could identify, the nomads. And they were known all along the compass where those stars were. And they would go so many feet or so many marches, so many times walking towards the east, towards, let's say, this star here, which is the Naka star. They would go so many times. And the way they would know how to get there is they would have poetry. And they would know how many times that poem needed to be recited before they had to stop and then turn direction and go to the next star, which would be, in this case, the Altir star. Then they had to go another piece of poetry, and they would do it by poetry. And that's why you see even today that the camel herders still are brilliant poets, because it helped them survive in the desert. Now, that was lost once roads were created. There was no reason to use them anymore once roads were created. And that's why the later Arabs never used poetry. They never used the stars. They were not astronomical, and that's why so many of their qiblas were inaccurate. But let's get back to Petra. What's the significance of Petra? Why Petra and not Mecca? How many people here have been to Petra? What did you notice there? Probably this. Absolutely, and all these carved out buildings. Tombs and temples, that's correct. All carved by hand. One of the great wonders of the world. Enormous. If you ever get to Jordan, make sure you go to Petra. So whose tombs and whose temples? These are the Nabateans. The Nabateans are the ones that used Petra. It was their sanctuary city. Remember, Nabateans did not have any political structures. They were not great kingdoms. They were nothing more than great tradesmen. They were the ones that could go across the desert like no one else. That's because they used the stars. And because of the fact that they never gave up using the stars, they were the best merchants. And that's why in every major city you will find Nabateans. And the Nabateans were the ones that did the trade, but in order to do that, they would have to go and live amongst the people, and then all the caravans would come to them, and they would always have the best price. And that's how they continued to do that. The Nabateans are the ones that give us Arabic. The Arabic language comes from the Nabatean script. The Nabateans are also the ones that give us the name Allah, the name of the Muslim God. The Nabateans also gave us the name of Alat and Aluza, who is the female consort of Allah. Ooh, tutu, did I just say that? Allah has a wife? I had no idea. But see, the Nabatean god Allah has a wife named Alat, which is the feminine form of Allah. But see, that's not a name. Allah means nothing more than the God. It's a title. Allat is the female equivalent to the goddess. So they must have a name, and that's true. Allah has a name, Dushara, and Allat has another name, Al-Uzza. Now, have you heard of Allat and Al-Uzza before? You have if you read your Quran. Shame on you for not reading your Quran. Chapter 53, verse 19 and 20. The satanic verses made popular by Salman Rushdie. Allat, Al-Manat, and Al-Uzza. Two of the names are one goddess, who is the wife of Allah, which is an Abbatean god. You can find the temples of Dushara there in Petra. You can also find the temples of Allat there in Petra, and also Al-Uzza. That's why we have to go back to the Nabateans. We've got to understand what they're talking about. And when you go back to the Nabateans, why don't you start with Petra? Let's go back to Petra, and what do we find about it? Lo and behold, it's in a valley, and it has a parallel valley. Lo and behold, it has a stream going through it. Outside of the ruins is a pillar of salt. If there was any pillar of salt, it would be right outside of Petra. It has fields, it has trees, it has grass, it has fruit, it has clay and loam. It has olive trees. Everything we see in the Quran, where this prophet comes from, the city of the prophet, fits Petra. None of it fits Mecca. Can you then understand why when you read the Quran and you read all these geographical locations, you can see none of this could be in Mecca. It all has to be in Petra. Let's go one step further. Remember I talked about earlier about these people that this prophet had contact with? These people from Ad, 23 times. These people from Thamud, 24 times. These people from Midian, 7 times. Take a look and see where Ad, Thamud, and Midian. They're way up here, right around Petra. If he's going to have contact with them, of course he would, because they're right outside his city. No helicopter is needed, but you would if you're way down here in Mecca. So every one of the geographical locations fits Petra. Why is this significant? Well, let's review. Nothing is known of Muhammad until the 7th century from Arab sources. His book, the Quran, and its manuscripts don't appear until the early 8th century. His city, Mecca, isn't referred to until the mid-8th century. His biography, the Sirah, and the sayings, Hadith, don't appear until the early and late 9th century. Yet, thus much of what we know of Muhammad is written down hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. It looks like he is nothing more than later redaction, possibly begun by Abdul Malik. Remember, I told you I'd come back to Abdul Malik. Well, we're going to come back to him now. That's why people like Humphrey says, Islam in the Prophet's life as we know it was not derived from the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years and then was redacted back onto the Prophet's life and compiled in the 9th century. So, the questions we have asked, why are there no Muslim sources for 200 years? Why do the claims they make not fit the 7th century historical record? Why are the geographical references so few and confusing? And why do they all seem to fit an area much further north? Why is it that there are so many references to vegetation which wouldn't exist in Mecca? Why is Mecca not on the trade route? Why is Mecca not mentioned until 741 and not included on maps until 900? Why do all the Qiblas face Petra for the first 100 years, then are confused for the next 100 and aren't standardized to Mecca until 822 or 827, 200 years too late? Is it not surprising that historians now consider much of what we now know about early Islam is possibly spurious? So, the million-dollar question, what really happened? I told you I was going to answer you. What then went on? Now, this is what I think in September of 2019, okay? I'm saying that to the cameras, I'm saying it to all of you. Next year, I may change my mind as new information comes in. This is what we know as of this month right now. This is fast changing, and we have to keep adding to it. That's what's so exciting about history, and that's why I love this kind of work. This is a possible scenario. This is what we think so far. To make sense of all this, we will need to begin with Abdullah ibn Zubair. Who is he? He was the governor of Petra under the auspices of Marwan, who was the father of Abdul Malik. Remember, for you all know this, I'm sure, in 661, the Umayyads are the ones that start what we know as the Islamic Empire. They started 661, and they have the Sufyani family takes over the Umayyad Empire, and from 661 up until 680, you have the Sufyanis in power. And then from 680, Marwan defeats the Sufyanis and takes over the Umayyad dynasty as the Marwanid king, the first Marwanid king. His son, Abdul Malik, comes to power in 685. Hugely significant. Now that his son is in power, Zubair, back in 683, rebels against Marwan. And when he rebels against him, But where is Marwan? And where are the Marwanids? They're way up in Damascus. What are they doing way up in Damascus? If they were Muslims, shouldn't they be down in Medina or Mecca or the Hijaz, that central area? They're 1,000 miles further north in Damascus. Why has no one asked this question? You need to ask this question. So he's way up in Damascus. Zubair is there in Petra. He rebels against his master, and what he does, he grabs the black stone and shoots down south. Black stone, you've heard of that stone, haven't you? Where is the black stone today? It's in the Kaaba, is it not? It's on the northeast corner, sitting there in that beautiful silver, what do you call it, that beautiful silver encasement. There it is, but it's not a stone. Take a look at it carefully. It's about 5 or 6 small little pebbles, broken up. The black you're looking at is nothing more than tar to keep it together. But it used to be a stone. And according to the Nabateans, it was their stone. Wherever the black stone went, so did God's presence. So when he takes it out of Petra and shoots down to the south, he takes God's presence with him. Well, you can see why the Umayyads were infuriated. However, Abd al-Malik cannot go after him. He's too busy up in Damascus. He has to let him go. And so what does he do? Well, remember, first of all, he has to create his sanctuary. He has to maintain his sanctuary. Now, take a look at this map here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. There are 2 empires that existed that were vying with each other. One is that one there. That's the Umayyad Empire. They had their headquarters in Damascus, but their sanctuary is where the gold circle that I've just put up. That is Petra. Over to the east, in what used to be Ctesiphon, but then became Baghdad, is the Abbasids. So you have the Umayyads here in Damascus, and you have the Abbasids over here in Baghdad. The Abbasids are the remnants of the Persians who were defeated. They were the Sassanid Empire. They were defeated. Remember I talked about the Sassanians and the Byzantines when they were warring with each other? They destroyed each other's treasuries, so there was really nothing left. So when the Arabs came in, they just walked right into a vacuum and they destroyed the Sassanians. They then took over Damascus. So these people hate each other. They do not like each other at all. The Umayyads ruled from 661 up until 749. Meanwhile, the Abbasids hate them and they would like to destroy them. The Umayyads have their sanctuary in Petra. So where do the Abbasids have their sanctuary? Well, Zubair comes and runs away from Petra and he comes down to the south. Looks like he comes down to here, to Mecca, which is where he's from. He's from the Hijaz. So he needs an ally. Well, what better ally than the Abbasids? So he makes his alliance with the Abbasids, which means now they have another sanctuary, Mecca, while the Umayyads have this sanctuary, Petra. Are you starting to see what's going on? Are you starting to see why I'm putting this and why I'm showing you this? Hold on to that map, and now let's go back to Abd al-Malik. Remember, by 649, or by 652, these Arabs had taken over Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, and Cairo. Then they start moving right across North Africa, and they take from Spain over here in the west all the way to India here in the east. Are you looking your direction? That whole swath of land is under their control. But they do not know how to rule cities because they're nomadic. They are out in the deserts on camels. They don't know how to rule the cities, so they need someone to help them to rule the cities. So who are they going to use? Well, they're going to use their cousins. Who are their cousins? Who are the other people that they trace back to Abraham? The Jews and the Christians. And the Jews and the Christians lived in cities. They were quite literate, so they used the Jews and Christians to run their cities for them. Meanwhile, they're conquering and destroying everything, and they're going right across Africa. They come over this side. You have the Sufyani family is up in Damascus. You now come to Marwan, and then you come to Abd al-Malik. So now they've been in power for 40 years. And Abd al-Malik suddenly realizes that everything he's depended on are the Jews and the Christians. But here's the problem. The Jews and the Christians have a prophetic line, do they not? From Abraham through Isaac. The Arabs have no prophetic line. The Jews and the Christians have revelation. They have a scripture. The Jews have the Old Testament. The Christians have the New Testament. The Arabs have no scripture. Yet they are the superpower of the day. And Abd al-Malik knows that. And he knows that he now controls all these cities. He has the Christians and the Jews working for him, yet he has no Arab identity. How do you create an Arab identity that can compete with the Jews and the Christians? Well, you don't have to worry about the Jews so much because they're a small group. The people you really have to worry about are the other big superpower, which are the Byzantines. They're Christian. So you're going to have to compete with the Christians. What do? Well, the first thing you do is build a building. And that's what he did. He builds this great structure. But he doesn't build in Damascus where he's living. He doesn't build it in Mecca or Medina. You would think he would build it there if it's his own sanctuary. Obviously, his sanctuary wasn't down there. He doesn't build it in Petra. He sticks it in the middle of Jerusalem. Why in Jerusalem, of all places? Well, who points towards Jerusalem? Who worships towards Jerusalem? There's the Dome of the Rock, the greatest structure of its day, still amazing even today. The reason he puts it in Jerusalem is because of this church, the Church of the Sepulchre, which is the sanctuary for the Byzantine Christians. And look and see where he places his building. He puts it above it on the mountain, looking down onto it. So this is a one-upmanship. It's bigger than the Church of Sepulchre. It's right there where the Jews and Christians see as their sanctuary, and he places this huge structure using Byzantine architecture. Later on, his son then builds this building, the Al-Aqsa. But let's go back to the Dome of the Rock, hugely significant. It employs the same Byzantine architecture, but much larger and more prominent. It sits above the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is situated in the holiest city of the Jews and the Christians. That's why it's not in Damascus or Mecca. Muslims say, if you ask them today why that building is there, they will always tell you it's because of the Miraj, where Muhammad went up to the seven heavens. That's why it's there. It's the third most holy shrine in Islam. If that were the case, then something should have been written about the Miraj on the building. Am I correct? So let's go look at the building and let's see what we now find. Now, to do that, you have to go to the only original part, which are these two ambulatories. This one and that one, where the two green arrows are coming to. That's the only original part of the Dome of the Rock, because it's been destroyed and rebuilt 11 times. So that's going back to 691. And to look at those ambulatories, you need to look at the Arabic that's on them. You need to go to where those green arrows are going to. This is the Arabic. The inscriptions are there. Those are the original inscriptions. This is the first Quranic material we can find anywhere in the world. This is the first Quranic material that we can find. And it's written on the Dome of the Rock. Look and see what they say. There is nothing about the Miraj. There's nothing about Muhammad going to the seven heavens. So what do they say? Well, you see chapter 4, verse 171 on the Dome of the Rock. O people of the Scripture, who's that? That's us. Do not exaggerate in your religion, nor utter aught concerning Allah, save the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, the Son of Mary, was only a messenger of Allah, and his word which he conveyed unto Mary, and a spirit from him. So believe in Allah and his messenger, and say not three, cease. It is better for you, Allah is only one God, for is it removed from his transcendent majesty that he should have a son. Who is that against? That's against Jesus. That's against the Trinity. That's against his divinity, and that's against his sonship. That's attacking directly Jesus. Am I correct? Surah 17, ayah 111. Praise be to God, who hath not taken unto him a son. There again, attacking the sonship of Jesus Christ, and who hath no partner, attacking that Jesus would be the partner of God, from chapter 5, verse 72. In the sovereignty, nor hath he any protecting friend through dependence. And then they introduce Surah 112. There is no God but God. There's the beginning of the Shahada, right? That's the first part of the Shahada. La ilaha illallah. He has no associate, again attacking Jesus, saying he is God, the one God, the eternal besought of all. He begetteth not, nor was begotten. That's attacking John 3:16. And there is none comparable to him. And now we get the second part of the Shahada, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Now Muhammad is introduced. So here you have this structure that's attacking Jesus Christ, our Lord, his sonship, his divinity, the Trinity, all of which are on that first building that was good. Can you see what it is? It's basically Abdul Malik is creating this building to attack Byzantine Christianity, to attack us at our foundation. Because without the divinity of Jesus, without the Trinity, without his sonship, without the fact that he was begotten, what are we? Who do we have? Hugely significant. Why have people not looked at this? Now, while he does that, you have to look at the Caliphal Protocol. These are the official documents that begin with the Sufyani period. Dr. Yehuda Nevel, in his book, talks about it, and he goes through these documents, and he notices that all the way up from the Sufyani period up until 680, when Marwan comes to power in 680, up until 685, all of the Caliphal Protocols begin with a Bismillah, but it's not the Bismillah we have in the Quran, in the Fatiha in the first verse. It is not Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim. That is not in any of these Caliphal Protocols. Until you get to 691. In 691, the Bismillah suddenly changes to Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim, and then you get the Shahada. Then Muhammad is introduced along with Allah. The same year that he builds the Dome of the Rock, he also changes these protocols. And from 691 overnight, every one of the protocols then begin with the Bismillah, including the Shahada. Muhammad is first introduced on the Dome of the Rock. He's then introduced on the Caliphal Protocols. And then he does this. You have the coins. And remember, the Arabs were dependent on the Byzantine, what we know as the Byzantine dinar, which is over here. But take a look. The Byzantine dinar has an emperor on the front, right? And then it has the Byzantine cross on the back side of the coin. All of the Sufyani caliphs, including Marwan himself, then introduced this coin, the dirham. The dirham continues with the same, instead of the emperor, it now has the caliph. Hold on a minute, I thought Muslims couldn't have images. Am I correct? So what's an image doing on the coin? Obviously, images were not important. Images had not become a problem that early. On the back side, you can see the Byzantine cross again. Why in the world would they be having a Byzantine cross if they were so much against the crucifixion? Chapter 4, verse 157 confronts the crucifixion and pretty much denies the crucifixion. So what's it doing on their coin? Now let's go to Abdul Malik. He introduces this coin. There's his image on it with the sword. That's Abdul Malik there. He introduces this one in 685, and he continues it up until 692, including the Byzantine cross on the back. So he obviously doesn't have a problem with imagery at all. And then in 692, he introduces this coin. In Arabic, there is the Shahada. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. There's only one God but God, and Muhammad is the prophet of God. So he's introduced it on the Dome of the Rock, he's introduced it on the Caliphal Protocols, and he's introduced it on the coins. That's how he is creating his Arab identity. They needed a man. Abdul Malik introduces here his Arab identity in the guise of an Arab prophet. Beginning with the Dome of the Rock in 691, it's larger than any other non-Arab structure. It's facing the Arab sanctuary Petra. It incorporates inscriptions against Byzantine Christianity. It introduces their faith called Islam. It introduces their people called Muslim. It introduces the prophet Muhammad is introduced on the Dome of the Rock. In the Caliphal Protocols, they change overnight in 691, introducing Muhammad there as well. And then in 692, he introduces the new coin, replaces the images with Arabic script, introduces the Shahada on these coins, including Muhammad's name. Therefore, they now have the man. But then every man, every prophet has to have a revelation. Where's the book? Well, we're going to see this tomorrow. I'm going to not stay too much time with this because I really want to see what you're going to see the answer to this tomorrow. Because what we now know is we have no Quran at all before Abdul Malik. And it's only his son that the Qurans are introduced with. And not any of them are the same. And not any of them are the same as the Quran we have today. Ooh, I love that. Makes my job so easy. So he has the man. He then has the book. He begins the book. He does not have the book. We're going to see that tomorrow. The Quran that we find is not the same Quran that we have today. Hold on till tomorrow, because that's a lot more devastating. But once he has the man, once he has the book, then he needs a place. Two empires are competing to create an Arab sanctuary. The Umayyads and the early Nabatean sanctuary is in Petra. Remember I showed you the map. That was destroyed in an earthquake in 713. Once it gets destroyed by an earthquake, now God's presence is no longer there. That's why they had to move the sanctuary. A new place is needed, and that's why Mecca was then chosen. This was first noted in 727. The first mosque that we see that's facing Mecca is there in Banbor in Pakistan. Mecca was possibly chosen by the rebel Abdullah al-Zubair and those from Baghdad and the Kufa, along with the Abbasids, in defiance of the Umayyads in Petra. So this is a political gesture. One empire against another empire. So the Umayyads are up here, they're going towards Petra. Petra is now destroyed. The Abbasids say, this is where the new sanctuary is, it's now in Mecca. The Abbasids, Zubair, with their sanctuary in Mecca, then demand allegiance to the surrounding tribes. Now can you see why we have 4 Qiblas? You ready? Here we go. Why do we have 4 Qiblas? Because you have 2 empires who are competing to create that Arab sanctuary. The earliest Qibla was facing Petra. They had their allegiance to the Umayyads in Damascus. All of them were to be allegiance because they were created by the Umayyads. Then you had then you have the Meccan. That's not actually in sequence, and actually you have the in-between goes next. You have Al-Hajjaj. Al-Hajjaj is the governor of Iraq. He is the one that orders a new Qibla to be in between both Petra and Mecca. That's why in 706 you start seeing the in-between. They're very accurate. They're facing nowhere. There's nothing there, just a bunch of sand. But they're demanded by Al-Hajjaj because he is waiting to see who's going to win out. He's hedging his bets. And he's waiting to see whether the Umayyads in the north or the Abbasids in the south, whether it's going to be Petra or Mecca. Are you following that? Finally, the Abbasids create their own sanctuary in sometime just before 727, and that's in Mecca. Now you have the North African mosques and in Spain all pointing their mosques parallel to that line because they're waiting to see who's going to win out. They don't want to go with either the Umayyads or the Abbasids, and they have to wait till 749. Finally, in 741, the Abbasids destroy the Umayyads, and from that time on, all of the mosques start to begin to face Mecca. It's for political exigency. This is all to do with politics. This has nothing to do with theology. This has nothing to do with Muhammad. This has nothing to do with God. It's 2 empires vying with each other, and depending on which one you're going to support, you point your mosque towards, and they're still pointed there till today. So, what's the scenario? Here's a what if. Now that the Muslims have a prophet, Muhammad, and a revelation, the Quran, and a sanctuary, Mecca, they need to have a history. You've got to put some history to this man. Can you now understand why it took them till 833 to finally write his story down? And Ibn Hisham said very clearly that he took from Ibn Ishaq what he liked and threw away what he did not like. How much of it did he throw away? We don't know. Now can you understand why it takes him 200 years to write the history down? And as far as the sayings are concerned, Al-Bukhari, according to the tradition, he was given 600,000 of these sayings. 600,000. He was to look at them and see which one were authentic and which were not. And he whittled them down, threw away 98% and only retained 7,397. Out of 600,000, he brought it down to 7,397. And those are the 9 volumes that we have today. They have the Sirah, they have his sayings, and that's why the tafsir finally don't even begin to be written until the 10th century. So by the 9th and 10th century, they now have the book, the man, the place, and the story. And a new religion is formed and growing. Yet not within a mere 22 years, but evolving over 200 to 300 years. Isn't that what the historians are now concluding? Isn't that exactly what the historians are now concluding? So, let's summate. Why are there no Muslim sources for 200 years? Why do the claims do not fit the historical record, or the geographical references are so few and confusing? Why do they all seem to be much further north, no vegetation where they should be? Why is Mecca not mentioned until 740 and all the trade routes go through Petra? Not one of them goes through Mecca. Why do all the Qiblas face Petra for the first 100 years, then are confused for the next 100? Why is Abdul Malik's role? What is Abdul's role in this? And does a nation Islam really begin with him? So, if that is the case, what we now must conclude is, when we conclude that Islam is nothing more than a later redaction possibly begun by Abdul Malik, then continued by his descendants, proving Muhammad had nothing to do with the Quran. Therefore, so who is he and what's his importance? They've got the wrong man at the wrong place doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. What about Jesus? We know where Jesus was born, in Bethlehem. We know where Jesus grew up, in Nazareth. We know where Jesus died and when, in Jerusalem. We know what Jesus did for the last 3 years of his life. We know this all from eyewitness accounts, Matthew and John. We know this also from hostile accounts like Thallus, Tacitus, Josephus. One was a Greek, the other was a Roman, the other was a Jew. None of them liked Christians, and yet they all talked about Jesus Christ. We know when they were written, between 50 to 60 years, and we know that few doubt his history, which means we have the right man at the right place doing the right thing at the right time. Isn't that great? So, where to from here? Historians set the stage, we move it on. The questions they ask, we research and expand. We must confront Islam's historical foundation. We must challenge Muhammad in the Quran. We must demand the same of the Bible and Jesus Christ, and have always done so, and that's why we've always been transparent about our scripture. We must bring both into the public sphere and then let people come to their own conclusion. Why? Because similar historical questions have already all been asked of Christianity and answered. We need to bring our Muslim friends home. We got the better book, the better man, the better revelation, the better history, and the better place. God bless you. Now, we did say that we would have some questions, so I think there are, if you could tell me, Gabriel, where the mics are? Here and here. If people want to come up and ask questions, we will put them into the mic, and then we'll try to answer them as best we can. We'll do about maybe 5 or 6 questions, and then we'll call it for evening, because I see it's already 9 o'clock. Any questions?
That's the first question, Jay. Is just a question on, are you basically saying that there was a religion, a Nabatean religion, worshipping towards Petra that was later Islamicized? Is that effectively?
Exactly. So when you look and ask, and that's a good question, were the Nabateans the precursors to Islam? Absolutely. Were they already worshiping, not so much worshiping, it was more that was their sanctuary. They would not have the same view of God, though they have temples to Dushara and to Alat and Aluza. So certainly the temples are there. What we do know is that those earlier, the earliest mosque means a place to bow your head or towards, were all facing Petra. So when the Umayyads take over in 661, they just continue that tradition. But remember, 661, Muhammad was dead by 632, 30 years after Muhammad's death. And 624 is, according to the traditions, written in the 9th century, is when the Qibla was canonized. We're now in 661, when all these mosques start to appear. They're all facing Petra. They should have been for 40 years by that time facing Mecca. Not one faces Mecca. From 624, they should all. So they did not know about Mecca. There was no Mecca, because for them, they were all Umayyads, and all the Umayyads faced Petra. That's why when finally Petra is destroyed, first of all by earthquakes, they had to then create a new one, and that's where the Abbasids then appoint their one in Mecca. The first one we have is 727. 100 years later. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for a wonderful talk. What are Muslims actually taught about Islam, do you think?
I'm sorry?
What are Muslims actually taught about their religion, Islam? What do they understand?
What do Muslims understand about all this?
Yeah.
None of this they're taught. And remember, this has all been coming out in the last 10 years. Everything they're taught is what I said at almost the first slide. If you look at that first slide, I showed the classical account. But isn't that the same thing you've been taught? Isn't that the same thing we're all taught? Have you noticed we all have followed that narrative? And there's been no reason not to follow that narrative, because nobody's ever questioned this material. We were with Dr. Tom Holland last night, and when asked the question, what about your book on In the Shadow of the Sword? He said, every book that I write takes about 3 years to research and then write it. When I came to Islam, it took him 6 years to write that one. And the reason why is because there was nothing to go on. He was told about that. In fact, I told him about that you're not going to find any sources. And it's true, there's nothing written in that first period. There's nothing written in the next century. It's not till the 9th century that you can even take and find out what's written about this man, Muhammad. So because of that, this new material that we're now introducing tonight, it's not the first time I've introduced this. I've introduced it here at KT back in 2016. This is not new, but the conclusions we're coming to, that is new. Because we're going to have to keep revising our conclusions as we find out more material. But it's because of the fact that the rocks don't lie that this is so devastating. When you look at all these Qiblas that are all facing Petra up until 706, uniformly, and they're so accurate. Now, there has been some criticism that comes up, and the Muslims have been trying to push this forward by a man named Dr. David King. Have any of you read any of Dr. David King's material? I have not introduced that tonight. We're going to do that. Al-Fadi and I are actually going to introduce that. Dan Gibson has answered every one of those criticisms. That needs to be done. But I'm almost reticent to talk about Dr. David King because he is so childish in his criticism of Dan Gibson. It's almost as if he's having a tantrum. And the reason why is because he was the world's authority on the Qibla. Has always been. And he's in his 70s now. And suddenly, here comes this upstart from Canada who actually went to the places that he should have gone. He went to none of these places. He only went to one mosque physically, and that was the Samarkand Mosque. He did none of this research. Everything he did to find his material for the Qiblas was reading Muslim scholars from the 9th, 10th, and 11th century. He should have gone to the 7th and 8th century when these mosques were being built. And he only looked at their criticisms, and they were critical. Of course they were critical, because their Qiblas were not as accurate. That's why the earlier Arabs were much more accurate, and so they had nothing but terrible things to say about these people. And he says, this is all I need to know. And yet he is the world's expert on the Qibla. So we'll get into that. We'll be introducing that in our videos. Al-Fadi and I are actually going to do a whole series just on answering Dr. David King. But that's for a later time at a later place. That has yet to get into the schools. That has yet to be taught to Muslims. That has yet to make its way onto the university campuses. We're going to make sure it gets there. Because not just you need to know this story, Muslims need to know this story. This is their history. And much of what they have been told is fraudulent.
Thanks for what you've done. Do you think Christians should read the Quran?
I'm sorry?
Do you think a Christian should read the Quran?
Should a Christian read the Quran? Absolutely. In fact, that's one reason why we're so far behind. None of us have read the Quran. How many people here have read the Quran? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those who have read the Quran, did it make any sense to you? In English? What have you noticed about the Quran? It's all over the place, isn't it? Ulta pulta, as we say in India. Stories don't begin, stories don't end. And here's the problem. Why many Christians don't read the Quran is because it is so confusing. However, you do need to read the Quran to understand it. We're putting up on Fander Films a whole series now. You can go up almost every 3 days. I'm putting up a new video that's on looking at the internal critique, looking at the Quran as it is and criticizing it from within. We have to do this in our seminaries. We need to do this in our Bible schools. We need to have people who are teaching it. I want Sarah and John to stand up here. Here are two people who are teaching it. If you want to learn more about the Quran, talk to these two people right here. I want Alistair to stand up. He is also learning all about the Quran. These are the people who are here in London who can help you out. You need to bring them in because you need to understand that book. If you don't understand the Quran, you won't understand what you're up against. So yes, please read the Quran. But please, please, not before you go to bed. Okay? Stick to the Bible for them.
Thank you, Jeff, for a most informative talk. Just wondering, since we seem to be saying that the Islam was concocted basically later on for political purposes, what were the actual Arabs or Nabateans building? Why were they building mosques in the first place before the concoction? And were they worshipping one god or this Allat deity thing? And also, why were the mosques being built before the concoction, and what were they actually worshipping?
Okay, and this is the Nabatean precedents. What are you going to do with the Nabateans? On the Fander course, we have a whole lecture just on that question that we do in November. So if you really want to know it, go find our lecture. Sign up. But the Nabateans were, as I said earlier, they were camel herders. They were tradesmen. They were the best tradesmen in that whole part of the world because they were the only ones that could cross the desert and make their way and survive. And so all of the other empires used them to do all their trading for them. Now, they needed a place where they could come to die and a place that they could come to worship. And that's why Petra was chosen. So yes, you do find the Nabateans have those beautiful rock structures carved out of sheer by hand of tombs and temples. They didn't have a political entity themselves, so they had no political capital. But every family would have its family tomb. And so though you may die in another place, your body is brought to be buried there. So they had the temples there. Now that means that they saw it as the sanctuary of their religion. And that's why you find mosques or temples that were in all these far-reaching places. Once Islam was introduced by Abdul Malik, at that time then, remember he didn't introduce, there was no Muslims, there was no Islam. We don't know of, we do have references to Muhammad, two at least, and we do know that he was a warrior, but there's no, in any of the inscriptions about him from outside sources, they mention that he is a warrior. They don't mention anything about the fact that he's a Muslim, nothing about the fact that there was a religion called Islam that he followed, nothing about the fact that there was a Quran that he received. Can you see there? And nor that he lived in Mecca. None of these are referenced. That only comes much, much later. So what we think is happening is once Abdul Malik then creates this religion in contradistinction to Byzantine Christianity, then of course that prophet had to be chosen. Because he was well known at that time, that's why we think he was chosen. Something also happens to Muhammad in 622. We do know that that was probably the beginning of the insurrection against the Romans. So that's why 622 is important. But there's an awful lot yet we need to know. In a year, I'll be able to answer that question much more concisely because we'll have an awful lot more researched. It looks like, though, that these Nabateans, who then become the Muslims, because now they are no longer just people who are tradesmen, now they have an empire. Now they have caliphs. Abdul Malik was a caliph. Now they control all this huge swath of land. Now as a political entity, they needed to have an Arab identity. It's because of that identity that they had to create the prophet. And once the prophet was created, then they had to give him a book. And once the book, and that's why the book, if you look at it, it is all over the place. Because it's been borrowed, and you'll see that tomorrow. Look and see how much of the Quran has been borrowed. But they borrowed from the wrong sources. Wait till you see what we're going to show you tomorrow. And that's why it's so important that you need to nail down every one of these actions in a timeline. Follow the timeline, and you see it all fits to the right timeline. Great question. No more questions? One more.
Thank you, sir, for everything you've told us. I just want to know, how do we confront the Muslims when they say Bible has been changed? It's not original.
Okay, how do you do it? How do you answer a Muslim when they say the Bible has been changed? This is a real easy one. I love this one because I love it when they ask him that. Just say two words, where and when. Where and when. Where was it changed and when was it changed? Now help them out. Was it changed before Muhammad or after Muhammad? Was it changed before the 7th century or after the 7th century? They'll say before. If that's the case, go right back to the Quran and say, where in the Quran does it say it's been changed? Give me one verse. Now, I've been doing this for almost 40 years now. Almost for 40 years, I've asked this question. No Muslim has been able to answer me that. I said, I'll help you. Let me just tell you. Go to chapter 10, verse 94. Go to chapter 21, verse 7. And it says very clearly there, O Muslims, if you have any questions, go to the people of the book because they have been given the Tawrat and the Injil for you. So why would it tell them to go back to a corrupted book? Chapter 4, verse 136 says, I, Allah, have given you both the Tawrat and Injil and the Quran. So why would God give them a corrupted book? Chapter 5, verse 46 and 47 and verse 68 says, O Christians, go to those scriptures God has given you, for they are signs for you. We're to go back to those scriptures. Nowhere does it talk about corruption. So the Quran is very clear, there is no corruption at all.
Reading of Quran, there is no substance, and it seems confusing. That's
okay, come tomorrow. That's where we're gonna destroy the Quran tomorrow, but not tonight. But can you see, for every one of these questions, you need to have an answer. And we're going to be putting up all these answers. They're already up on the internet. They're on YouTube. They can all be given in 2 or 3 minutes.
To ask you, if I was a Muslim sitting under this teaching, and I actually had felt that, oh my gosh, this could be true, I would be afraid. What would be your advice?
Oh, I love that question. What would you do if you were a Muslim sitting here? What would be my advice to them? I would say, come on home. Come on home. Especially what you're going to hear tomorrow. If the book and the man are not what Muslims have been telling me since I was height to a grasshopper, if I realize that everything I've known about Muhammad is not true, everything I've known about how Islam began is not true, and everything I've been told about my Quran is not true, yet I still want to believe in God, and I still want to believe in Scripture, and I still want to believe in somebody, who do you think's got the answer? We are the only ones that have an antidote. We are the only ones that have the alternative. And I would say, do not give up on God. Give up on Allah. He's nothing more than a Nabatean God, a pagan God, a polytheistic God. Come on home to Yahweh, the real God, the eternal God, who has a name. Don't give up on the prophetic line. You've got the wrong prophetic line. Nothing comes through Ishmael. We leave him in Genesis 22, referred to in Genesis 17. Come on back to the real prophetic line that comes through Isaac. But don't just talk about the prophetic line. Don't even have anything to do with Issa. They got the wrong Jesus. Come on back to Yeshua. Because this is the God who comes down our level. This is the God that enters time and space. This is the God that can walk and talk with me. This is the God that can relate to me. This is the God that dies for me. What a God we've got. So bring him home. That's the best answer you can give.